It was the beginning of summer, and I was spending some time at my dad's place out in the country. I had just finished my second year of college, and I needed a break. The woods behind the house had always been my escape, quiet, peaceful, a place to clear my head. This day started like any other, and I had no idea how much everything would change by the end of it. My stepmom, Clara, was 59, but you wouldn't think it by looking at her. She was sharp, independent, and had this way of commanding attention without even trying. She married my dad a few years back after he lost my mom. While they seemed happy, there was always this weird distance between us. It wasn't that we didn't get along, but there was something about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I had gotten up early that morning to go for a hike. The sun was warm, and the woods were alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. It was perfect. I walked deeper into the woods, following the familiar trail, until I reached a small clearing where I liked to sit and think. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, surprised to see Clara standing there, her hands in her pockets, a small smile on her face. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I shrugged, trying to keep it casual, but I could feel my heart start to race. "Sure, if you want." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the trees around us before settling on me. "I needed some fresh air," she said, sitting down next to me on the fallen log. "You always seem to know the best spots." I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I guess I've spent a lot of time out here." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the woods. It felt strange, though. There was something different about Clara today. She wasn't the calm, composed woman I was used to seeing around the house. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking my video. There was a tension in the air between us, and I could feel it growing. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know, Chris, I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "About us." I frowned, not sure where she was going with this. "Us? Yeah," she said, turning to look at me directly. Her eyes had this intensity I hadn't seen before. "About how things have been between us since I married your dad. We've never really connected, have we?" I shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, it's not like we've had any problems." She shook her head, cutting me off gently. No problems, but there's been this distance. I can feel it, and lately I've been wondering why." I didn't know what to say. Clara had always been somewhat distant, sure, but I figured it was just because she didn't want to overstep, given that she wasn't my real mom. But now, sitting there in the woods, I could feel her words hanging between us like a question that demanded an answer. "I don't know," I finally said. "I guess I just thought you didn't really care." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Chris, I've always cared, but I didn't know how to reach out to you, and now..." She paused, her hand resting on mine. "I feel like we've missed something." I looked down at her hand, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I just stared at her, my mind racing. What was she trying to say? "You're not a kid anymore," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've grown up. I see that now." Her words sent a jolt through me, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "What are you saying, Clara?" She smiled, but it wasn't the comforting smile I was used to. It was softer, more intimate. "I'm saying that maybe we don't have to keep pretending there's nothing between us." I froze, not sure if I had heard her right. "Clara, we can't." But she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto mine. "Why not?" she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "We've both felt it. You can't deny that." I didn't know what to say. I had felt it, the strange tension between us, the way her presence always seemed to affect me more than it should. But I had never thought she would acknowledge it, let alone act on it. Don't miss out on the journey to 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button now and be part of something big before everyone else. Before I could respond, she closed the distance between us, pressing her lips against mine. It was soft, tentative at first, like she was testing the waters. But then as I kissed her back, it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real. Everything else faded away, the trees, the birds, even the guilt. It was just me and Clara, caught up in a moment that felt both wrong and inevitable. Her hands moved to my face, pulling me closer, and I found myself responding without thinking, without questioning what this meant. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. We can't keep doing this, I said, my voice shaky. She smiled again, but this time there was a sadness in her eyes. I know, she whispered, but I also know we can't ignore it anymore. I nodded, my mind still spinning. I didn't know what the future held or how we were supposed to navigate this new reality. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to pretend this hadn't happened. We'll figure it out, I said quietly. She stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off her dress, her expression more composed now. We'll take it one step at a time, but we need to be careful, Chris, she said. I nodded. Yeah, we will. As we walked back through the woods, the air between us was charged with something new. Something neither of us had expected but couldn't deny. There was no turning back now. Whatever came next, we would face it together. For now, though, it was enough to know that we had finally acknowledged what had been simmering beneath the surface. We didn't have all the answers, but we had time, and for the first time, we had each other. As we made our way back toward the house, the woods seemed to close in around us, shielding us from the outside world. Everything felt more intense, the sounds of the birds, the breeze rustling the leaves, and the tension between Claire and me. My mind was still reeling from what had just happened, but somehow it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. When we reached the edge of the woods, Claire paused and turned to me, her face calm, but her eyes still holding that intensity. "Chris," she said softly, "we can't let this get out of control." I nodded, understanding what she meant. "I know. I don't want to mess things up for you or for Dad." She smiled faintly, reaching out to touch my arm. "It's complicated, but we need to figure out how to handle it slowly. We don't have to make any decisions right now, but we need to be careful." There was a weight to her words, but I also sensed a mutual understanding. Neither of us had planned for this to happen, but now that it had, there was no point in pretending we could go back to the way things were. We both knew that ignoring it would only make things worse. "I'll follow your lead," I said quietly, my heart still racing. "We'll take it one step at a time," Claire nodded, her eyes softening. "That's all we can do." She took a deep breath and gave me a small, reassuring smile. "But for now, let's just keep this between us, okay? Your dad doesn't need to know anything until we figure things out." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. "It's our secret." We stood there for a moment longer, the sounds of the woods fading into the background as we looked at each other. The intensity of the kiss lingered in the air, but there was something else too, something calmer, more grounded. We were no longer just two people tiptoeing around an unspoken connection. Now, we both knew where we stood, even if we didn't have all the answers. Finally, Claire broke the moment, turning toward the house. "We should head back," she said, her tone lighter now. "Your dad will wonder where we've been." As we walked together side by side, the tension between us began to ease. Claire seemed more at peace now, and I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. There were still questions, so many questions, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. When we reached the house, my dad was in the kitchen cooking dinner. He turned around as we entered, smiling warmly. "You two were gone for a while. Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just went for a walk." Claire chimed in smoothly. "The woods are beautiful this time of year. We just lost track of time." My dad laughed. "Well, I'm glad you're back. Dinner's almost ready." We exchanged glances, and Claire gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod as if to say, "We're okay." And in that moment, I realized that we would be. Over the next few weeks, things between Claire and me stayed quiet. We didn't rush into anything, and we made sure to keep things as normal as possible around my dad. There were moments, glances, brief touches that reminded me of what had happened in the woods, but we kept our distance, careful not to let anything escalate too quickly. But we didn't avoid each other either. In fact, Claire and I started to talk more, to get to know each other in a way we hadn't before. There was an honesty between us now that hadn't existed before that day in the woods. And as strange as it was, it felt good. It felt right. One evening, after my dad had gone to bed, Claire and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. The night was warm, and the stars were bright overhead. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before she finally spoke. "Chris, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. "I don't regret it, but I want to make sure that whatever happens next, we're both on the same page." I looked over at her, the moonlight casting a soft glow on her face. "I feel the same way," I said. "I don't regret it either, but we need to be careful. We need to take our time." She smiled, turning to face me. "I'm glad to hear you say that. I just don't want to rush into anything that could hurt us, or your dad." I reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We'll figure it out together. No rush." Claire smiled, and for the first time, I felt like we were both on solid ground. There was no need to rush, no need to force anything. We had time to figure out what this meant for both of us, and for my dad. In the weeks and months that followed, Claire and I grew closer, but we kept things respectful and quiet. We knew the risks, but we also knew that what we had was real. We took it slow, letting things unfold naturally, and eventually we found a way to be in each other's lives that felt right. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. And in the end, that was all that mattered.